Mr. President, I rise today to talk about the unwinnable war in Ukraine, which has already cost American taxpayers billions of dollars. Now, anyone who dares question the uniparty's narrative on the war in Ukraine is obviously going to get criticized. That's okay. The media has been complicit in pushing this narrative. Think about, when was the last time you saw live footage on the ground in Ukraine? It's rare because Ukraine is losing and is losing badly.
They're getting close, let's get out of here. Get out of here. Fucking hell. Down. Where's Casino? This is shit, man. Fucking tanks. I love Ukraine. I love my mustache. It's not a good place to sit. It's been hit already. Thank you, Russia.
Ukraine's Eastern Military Command confirmed on Wednesday that they told the Ukrainian troops still fighting in parts of Ugeldar to pull back to avoid becoming surrounded. The day before, the Donetsk regional authorities confirmed that Russian troops had almost reached the city center and that some Ukrainian forces were still hanging on in some districts. Over the past few days, according to the BBC, Ukrainian soldiers had to find their way out of Ugeldar by foot, as it was impossible to evacuate them otherwise. Many were killed and wounded by Russian drones and artillery as they tried to leave, and according to a Ukrainian soldier with the call sign Roman, many more are still missing.
Жахов? Два? Треть. А? СССР я. СССР? Как звали? Ты тоже?
All this bad news for Ukraine is not ignored by the Western press. The reality that Ukraine is being defeated can no longer be hidden. The Economist, one of the most pro-Ukrainian Western publications, recently titled an article as follows: "The war is going badly. Ukraine and its allies must change course." In essence, the article called upon President Zelensky to set credible military goals, which they admit do not imply reconquering all territories occupied by Russia. Quite sensible, yes, until it delved into delusional talk about inviting Ukraine into NATO immediately. Most curious of all was this quote that, to me, was inherently contradictory. It goes as follows: "If Ukraine and its Western allies want to win, they must first have the courage to admit that they are losing a war that has become a war of attrition." In summary, the article advises Ukraine that, in order to win, it somehow becomes necessary to first admit that they're losing. Logic, however, tells me that if one side is clearly losing, the humane thing is to consider peace talks or surrender. And I suppose that this can be interpreted as clear evidence that the West is only concerned with prolonging the war rather than ending it, even in the face of a Ukrainian defeat for the entire nation. But the grimmest yet most realistic statement from this Western report came in the following line: "No matter how much Zelensky wanted to expel Russia from Ukraine, he has neither the people nor the weapons to do it." This mismatch in military power is admitted by Ukrainian analyst Sergei Gurets, who said in a report to Ukrainian media that the front line is experiencing one of the most difficult periods in recent memory, given the Russian superiority in manpower and equipment in all sections of the front line. In Ugeldar, which will be the main topic of this video, he admitted that one Ukrainian brigade often faced 5 Russian ones, and that, and I quote, "If you count the number of personnel in our brigade compared to the enemy's, the ratio of manpower was really more like 1 Ukrainian to 10 or 12 Russian." The implication here is that most, if not all, Ukrainian brigades, which normally comprise 4,000 to 5,000 troops, are severely undermanned, and thus the average Russian brigade has probably double the troops. So today we will talk about the Russian capture of Ugeldar, which is a key logistical fortress which the Russians have been trying to capture since 2022. We will talk about how it occurred and what it means going forward for the Donbas conflict. So let's get into it. By the 28th of September, most military analysts understood that the fate of Ugeldar seemed predetermined. The city by then was almost surrounded, and the last defenders, with only one route for retreat, were unable to receive proper supply. Russian troops approached Ugeldar from the northeast and were able to enter the high-rise building area on the outskirts, as well as from the west via the Preshestivka town, which they had recently captured, and by which they were able to cut off supply to Ugeldar. At this point, the only road to which the defending Ukrainians had access was the main road that ran north to Bohoyavlenka, but as Medusa reports, the road was continuously attacked by drones and artillery. We tried to send supplies, organize evacuation of our wounded and dead soldiers, but without any success, commented a Ukrainian soldier with the call sign Roman. We lost a number of vehicles and then had to stop such operations, he told the BBC. The situation became critical when Russian troops entered the city and Ukrainian units started retreating without waiting for the order to pull out. BBC reports that Ukrainian defense lines were devastated by Russia's aviation bombs and thermobaric weapon systems. Trying to retreat from Ugeldar when it was nearly surrounded was extremely dangerous and came close to being a suicide mission. Ukrainian troops reportedly tried to escape at night, having to cross minefields via designated paths to avoid the road because it was closely monitored by the Russians. What's worse is the fact that, according to the BBC, those who managed to get out were not only exhausted and depressed, but also angry at the commander for not ordering the retreat earlier, as it was obvious for some time that the Ukrainian forces would not be able to hold the city for long. I don't know why they didn't give the order, said a Ukrainian machine gunner. Maybe it's fear of the military leadership, or maybe it was an order from the top to hold positions with our blood to the very end. The morale blow to the Ukrainian command from the loss of Ugeldar can be inferred from their total silence about its fall. According to the BBC, in the most recent daily briefings, the military's general staff kept silent about Ugeldar. For instance, in Wednesday morning's briefings, they said merely that the enemy launched unsuccessful attacks on our positions in Bohoyavlenka direction, without mentioning the situation in Ugeldar at all. Initially, the city was an important fortress covering any advance to the logistics centers of the Ukrainian defense for the southern Donbas, in particular the key city of Kurakovy. The Russian armed forces potentially could have and ought to have taken the city back in March of 2022, but one can only assume that they did not have the strength to do so at that time. The Ukrainians quickly occupied the high-rise buildings and mined the surrounding areas to fortify the city for its defense. Without the capture of Ugeldar, it was impossible for the Russians to advance south. The city is on a height and full of multi-storied buildings, which allows the defenders to see the flat surrounding terrain for many kilometers. Further, observation points and drone operators of the Ukrainian armed forces were located in high-rise buildings of neighboring mines. The basements of these high-rise buildings and mines served as reliable shelter for infantry. The Russians in 2022 had already realized that Ugeldar fortress not only prevented the offensive, but also interfered with the logistics in the south of Ukraine. To the east of Ugeldar is the Donetsk-Volnovakha-Mariupol railway. After the Russians captured Mariupol and Volnovakha, this railway enabled the Russians to use it as an alternative route for the delivery of goods to the occupied south of Ukraine from Crimea. This railway became especially important for Russia after the damage of the Crimean Bridge on the 8th of October in 2022 by Ukrainian armed forces. However, it was not possible to restore the railway, let alone movement on it, to the east of Ugeldar because the Ukrainian defenders were located a mere 3 to 5 kilometers from it. Seeing the urgent need to take the city, the Russian armed forces began to prepare forces to capture it. In the winter of 2022 into 2023, a powerful Russian assault on Ugeldar was repelled by the armed forces of Ukraine and inflicted significant losses on the Russians. The armored vehicles of the Russian motorized rifle units advancing through the minefields were especially affected. This resulted in the Russian Marines of the 155th Brigade being unable to receive assistance on the flanks. After several weeks of fighting, the remnants of the Russian assault groups were forced to retreat to their original positions in the neighboring villages of Nikolskoye and Pavlovka. After the failure of the assault, the Russians solved the logistics problem by building a new railway from the Rostov region to Volnovakha. In addition, Russian troops advancing from Avdiivka entered the area north of Kurakovo in early autumn of 2024 and began attacking Ugeldar from different directions. Now that Ugeldar has fallen, the 72nd Mechanized and the 79th Airborne Assault Brigades of the Ukrainian armed forces have retreated to positions north of the city near Bohoyavlenka to the outskirts of Konstantinovka. They hope to be able to use similar tactics that worked initially in Ugeldar, i.e., to try to defeat Russian troops who have to advance through several kilometers on the open steppe of Ukraine. The stability of the defense, however, will depend on the condition of the Ukrainian troops who were forced to withdraw from Ugeldar under fire from the advancing Russians. But things for Ukraine are even worse to the west of the city, where, according to Ukrainian media, the remnants of the Ukrainian defenders are still defending the area near Preshestivka, which was captured by Russia. Russia can also launch an offensive toward the other fortress city of Velika Novoselka. In fact, Medusa reports that Russian troops are already advancing on it from the south, and soon they may increase pressure from the east. Velika Novoselka is considered an important fortified area on the border of Donetsk and Zaporizhia regions, the loss of which may sharply worsen the situation for Ukraine in the Zaporizhia region. Sergei Goretz had this to say about the fall of Ugeldar in a report on the 1st of October. Of course, we have to talk about what might happen next. There is no collapse of the Ukrainian defense because there is another defensive line in the area of Bohoyavlenka. To improve the situation, we need to withdraw, regroup, and continue to hold the line. Of course, he admitted that it is harder to hold the line in the conditions where there is a new defensive line. Further, the Ukrainians are moving out of the urban area in the retreat, and as the fall and winter season approaches, it is better to be inside the cities than outside in the fields. We also know that the control of Ugeldar will improve the Russian logistics if it ensures the operation of the railroad through Volnovakha. He said that this will make it easier for the Russian enemy to supply the Dnipro and its eastern troops. However, we need to draw some conclusions as to why this happened, he said. Things started to deteriorate around the 30th of August. There was a superiority of Russian forces. In terms of brigades, many speak of a 5-to-1 advantage for the Russians, but according to Mr. Goretz, that advantage was nearer 10 or 12-to-1. This advantage, he said, influenced the constant assaults and the exhaustion of the Ukrainian troops, added to the Russian advantage in artillery and guided bombs. But that is not all. Mr. Goretz added that the Ukrainian armed forces need to figure out how to counter the Russian flanking encirclement, which has been repeated in many parts of the front. The issues of timely reinforcement of Ukrainian units and the change of brigade commanders at a crucial moment, all of which led to Ugeldar's fall. There are a lot of issues, he said. A Ukrainian serviceman by the name of Yevhen Lyevlev, situated on the Vulhedar direction, said that the Ukrainian army has a serious problem with the lack of infantry. The key position is mobilization, he said. It is not that the Russians have done anything drastically new at the front, he claims. The only problem is that the Ukrainian armed forces have a serious shortage of infantry. There simply isn't enough infantry to hold the lines, he said. In quotations, I don't want to scare anyone, but unfortunately, the front line will be getting closer and closer.